So today we're going to talk about one organelle in particular. We're going to talk about the cell membrane, which is also called the plasma membrane. Okay, so you could write either or down in your notes. So first, let's just talk about what's the main function. Okay, so the number one big function of your cell membrane is it controls what enters and what leaves your cells. So a good analogy would be like a fence with a gate. How many of you have a fence in your backyard? Okay, and how many of you have a gate on that fence? Okay, so think of it kind of like that gate, right? It allows what can enter your backyard, what can exit your backyard. Similar to how your cell membrane functions with your cells. All right, so we're going to look at the structure and some characteristics of your cell membrane. So how we were to describe it, we call it the fluid mosaic model. Okay. It's a solid structure, but it acts like a fluid. Okay, so it moves, it bends, it flows, just like a fluid would. And then who knows what a mosaic is? What's a mosaic? Good. Okay, it's like artwork, but it's made out of pieces like tiles, right? So it's all these little pieces are put together to make this artwork. So if you look at this structure here, y'all see my little my red little dot. At the top, do you see how you have all of these little circles and you put them together? They kind of look like a mosaic. Okay. Same thing over here. Do you see if you know what the art mosaic is, do you see how this is similar? Okay. So we call it fluid mosaic. It kind of looks like a mosaic, yet it moves like a fluid. All right, so now we're going to look just a little bit more in depth of the structure. So how is this membrane built? Okay. So it's made up of 2 layers of phospholipids. Okay. And another way we say it, instead of 2 layers, it's just a phospholipid bilayer. Okay. What does bi mean? 2. Okay. So phospholipid is just made up of a phosphate and some lipids. And what are lipids again? Like fats. Okay. And then the bilayer is just a double layer. Okay. So if you take a look at the picture down here, the little phosphate head is the blue circle. And then do you see these little black legs coming off of it? Yeah. Those are little fatty acid tails. Okay. And there's 2 layers. So do you see how there's this top layer and then there's a bottom layer? Okay. And then do you see how there's a lot of extras in this picture? Okay. So your membranes have all sorts of stuff. So the first one is they have protein channels and protein pumps. So do you see this large purple structure? Okay. Similar to this one, think of this the rubber band, right? So these now make openings through your membrane, and can substances go through that opening to either enter or exit the cell?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so that's a protein channel or a protein pump. We will circle back to both of those next week. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about them. Do you see these little yellow structures in the middle? Okay, these are cholesterols. How many of you hear the word cholesterol and you automatically think it's a bad thing? Okay. It turns out you have good cholesterol also. Okay, so these are good cholesterols. They are in here. They keep these little fatty acid tails from getting stuck and tangled together. Okay, so some cholesterol is really good. Okay, so these are good cholesterols. And then do you see some of these orange structures sticking out the top? These are carbohydrate chains that stick out. They're used for identification and communications. Your immune system can see these carbohydrates sticking out, and they know what your carbohydrates look like on your cells. And then they're like, oh, that's your cell. I'm not going to attack it. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit more at the phospholipids, the main part of the membrane. So I'm going to draw one off here. So here's our little phospholipid. It doesn't hurt if you draw one. So it has this little head. Okay. This is our phosphate. Okay. We call it hydrophilic. What does hydro mean? Okay. I'm going to write H2O for water. What is philic? Or if you have a philia, what does that mean?
Scared.
Nope, not yet. Save that one for later. Philic is you're going to love it. So I'm just going to draw a heart. So hydrophilic means you love water. Okay. So this little phosphate head loves water. And then you have these little fatty acid tails. That's what these 2 little lines are. We call these hydrophobic. So So again, what does hydro mean?
They literally like reflect the water. It's
'Kay.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
They hate it.
I'm going to be dramatic and write the word hate. Okay. So phobic, like it fears the water, it hates the water. Okay. So these little tails, they hate water. Okay. So then the way your membrane has formed, you have this double layer. Okay. And you see how the heads are always pointing on the outside. So either to the outside of the cell or to the inside of the cell. Okay. Are you primarily made up of water?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So these heads, they love water, so they arrange themselves, so they're always near water. Okay. Now these tails hate the water, so they have lined up in the middle. Is there any water in this section? No.
No, it's
Okay.
dry.
So this is how membranes formed in this bilayer. Okay. So the part that loves water is either pointing out of the cell or pointing towards the inside of the cell. The part that hates the water has the lined up, so it's not near the water. Let's look at, well, what are the big functions of the membrane? Okay. So one is protection, right? So it can protect your cells. Okay, it blocks things from going into your cell that you wouldn't want to go into your cell. The big one is semi-permeable. Highlight, star, underline, semi-permeable. We're going to talk about that one quite a bit over the next week. Okay. Does anyone know what the word permeable means? What about impermeable? We're going to learn something. Think like maybe like some loose gravel. Okay. Are there lots of little gaps in loose gravel that if it were to rain, would water be able to soak through it?
Impermeable is
Okay.
not being liquid.
Good. Okay. So permeable means that something can go through it. So think like rocks. There's little spaces, like water could move through those rocks. Okay. Impermeable, maybe think more like concrete. If it were to rain on like the sidewalk, is there like water going to like seep into the concrete, or does it get stopped at that top layer? It's going to get stopped, right? So impermeable means nothing can go through it. Okay. So then semi-permeable means some things can go through it, other things can't. Okay. So your cell membranes, they are semi-permeable. And hopefully the bubbles, they're meant to like serve as an analogy for that, where hopefully today you could see some objects could go through the bubble membrane, like the small bead. Okay. Other objects, like the red coin, couldn't. Your cell membrane also participates in communication. Okay. Again, these little carbohydrates can communicate with each other. They help your body maintain homeostasis. Do you remember hearing that word before?
You can live while not being awake.
Yeah, that's true. Homeostasis. Do you remember hearing this word at least?
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone remember what homeostasis is? What?
Isn't it like respondents?
Oh, no, but you're close. We talked about it when we did characteristics of life, and that is another characteristic. Homeostasis is like maintaining your internal like environment. Okay, like think about your body temperature. What does your body temperature have to be roughly? Like 98.5-ish, right? So your body has to maintain like that normal condition. So your cell membrane helps your body maintain homeostasis by letting molecules in or out of the cell as needed. Okay. And then finally, the cell membrane is used in recognition. So again, these little carbohydrates stick out, and they can communicate, and we can recognize. So it's like how your immune system can recognize it's your cell and not like a foreign body in you. All right, and then the last thing we're going to talk about for today is just we're going back to semi-permeable. Okay, so if you didn't write down what semi-permeable meant on the last slide, write it down on this slide. Okay, so semi-permeable, some things can pass through, other things can't pass through. Okay. So here are all the things that need to get across your cell membrane. Okay, so you need sugars, lipids. What are lipids again?
Fat.
Okay, fats, amino acids, oxygen, water, salt, and waste. Okay. So these need to get across the membrane either into the cell or out of the cell. Okay. So some of these can cross the membrane all by themselves. Others of these are going to need some help. So it turns out the smaller molecules can pass the membrane on their own. Okay. So the really tiny ones like water and oxygen, okay, they can just go across the cell membrane. Like today, if you had sand, if the sand was heavy enough, you could see it would just cross the membrane, like the little bead, right? It could just cross the membrane. Okay, so little molecules can just cross right through. And then your larger molecules, they need some help with something called a protein channel. This would be like the rubber band. Okay. So large molecules, they can't just go through that membrane. They have to either use a protein channel or a protein pump. Go ahead and write down what they are. We're going to circle back to these in another week or two. Okay, so we're going to come back. So protein channels look like this. And do you see how it's an opening over the whole membrane? Okay. So materials can go from one side of the cell to the other side of the cell. The key for a protein channel, they don't require ATP. Think of this as energy. Okay. So these ones don't require energy. If you put your rubber band in the bubble today and you just dropped like the big bead through, did you need any extra energy or did gravity just take care of it? Okay, right, so protein channels, it just allows the opening, but no extra energy is needed. Okay. These particles, we say move with the gradient or from high concentration to low concentration. Again, go ahead and get it down today. We're gonna circle back to this idea, I think maybe next Thursday, I think for sure next Friday. And then your membranes also have something called a protein pump. Okay. These require ATP or they require energy. Okay. So what kind of pumps are you familiar with?
Bike pumps.
What?
Bike pumps.
Okay, like a bike pump. And do you have to use energy to like put that air into your tires? Okay. Same thing. So these pumps require energy because you're pumping these molecules against the gradient, or you're moving them from low concentration to high concentration. That's the opposite of natural movement. Okay, so if you're going the opposite of what they naturally want to do, does it take energy to make that happen? Okay, again, we will circle back to protein pumps, probably not next week, but the week after.